So we're going to take a look at 18 Mag. This is a Lonnie game, an 18XX game, obviously, sort of. Looks like 18XX. I have to say, this may be the weirdest in the family that I've seen yet. You've got your 2038 and your Poseidon that don't use trains. There's also like 18 or something like that. I don't know. I don't have that one. But they have kind of an interesting mechanism for dealing with sort of how the movement works. 18 Poseidon has you as countries instead of as rail lines, basically, as countries instead of companies. And they have their specifics, but they run very much in the same concept as, 1829 did and onward, which is I'm running a corporation. I'm an investor. I buy corporation stocks. I get the presidency of that corporation, and I make the decisions for that corporation as to how it runs its transport routes, to be more broad than, the sort of pure train versions of it. Okay. That's fine. Something's going on in my gut. And how well you do is how well you manage your transport net, usually a rail net, for that corporation in the light of train obsolescence, as well as how you're managing, the stock portfolio that you have, and all kind of stuff like that. This is similar, but it throws some of it out the window, and in some ways feels more like a Winsome because of that, or some of the other kind of off the board, not normal train games. Let me explain the big deal here. In this game, all you're playing is, the only rail companies you own are these miners. The only train companies you own. They work like miners did in 1835 and in most games that have had miners in them. While you're running a miner, you get half the money in your miner treasury and half the money in your pocket. And some of those, I think, allowed you to fully withhold so you don't pocket any money. That's usually a bad idea, but every now and then you really need to. This doesn't allow that, but its miners run the way that most miners run in other games. Now, in most of the 18XX games, though, the miners disappear. Here they don't. And in fact, you're going to have your miners are your only rail companies that you run. And you're constantly going to be paying 50% into pocket and 50% into the company. Other weird things. Yes, there are major corporations. None of them are railroad companies. They are adjacent to railroad companies. So you have things like a coal mining company, which you buy shares in. It has a stock value that moves. That's one of the other things. Miners don't have stock value that moves. And that's, again, that's standard, right? That's pretty standard across the board for the games that have miners in them. They don't change their stock value. They just split your money. Well, here, the major corporations do have stock value. It's a nice straight track that'll actually run on multiples. I always kind of like multiple advanced tracks, so that's nice. But they give you the kind of capabilities that privates sometimes give you in other 18XX games. There are no privates here. Instead, what you do is you purchase the ability of the miner, of the corporation, and anybody can do it. You don't have to be president of that corporation. You don't have to have their agreement. You pay money and you get their service. Now, their services differ. To go briefly through them, this one allows you to transit difficult terrain, sort of an engineering company or something. And whenever you pay money to blast through mountains or cross rivers, you pay them. This one allows you to increase the value of red areas. You've got to pay a cost to it. That's a special kind called a car, and there's 3 car companies, and you should probably have them clustered. I'll switch it with the SCKEV there. These 2 are where you buy your trains from. At the beginning of the game, you start with a miner. You start with 50 bucks in the miner. Well, okay. Each miner, you start with multiple miners, but each miner starts with 50 bucks in it and 1 2 train. Its location is determined by its location on the board as per normal. There's a lot of them though, there's 13. I don't think I've seen that many in any other game. And that challenges the unlimited bank. Luckily I have another set of chips. The game comes with money as well. By the way, I want to speak to, not for this game, but for another one. My Lonnie games that I pick up, I always buy used. I've got somebody now keeping me in contact with some stuff, mainly the all aboard stuff. But I'm just never aware when something's for sale. And usually I can get my XXs for a little bit cheaper by buying them in the used market. I may not be able to do that easily anymore. There are reasons for that. But I got one, the 1840, in shrink wrap still. However, the guy who sold it to me told me, look, you know, I had some extra stickers and I lost them, you know, and he cut me a deal on the auction based on not being able to find them. I think he paid shipping or something like that, because I said, yeah, I'm fine with that, you know. Worst comes to worst, I figured I'd be able to get them somewhere or print them out and paste them or whatever. And I contacted, you know, customer support or whatever, but it really is just the designer, Leonard. And he agreed to send it to me, even under those conditions, for free, you know. And there was some mix-up there, and he had to, he got confused as to what I was asking for. So he actually paid printing and shipping costs for 2 sets of things for me, for someone who doesn't buy his games directly. So, you know, that's pretty fucking cool. And, you know, I made it absolutely clear that, like, I bought it on the used market and everything. I don't know, maybe he's just being nice to me because of the videos. I like to pretend that people watch these. But anyway, great customer service experience, and, you know, I would assume that this is not just because of my videos. I'm assuming it's just how he runs his company. And it led me to seriously consider, in fact, the reason I bought 18 Mag is I looked on his site, saw it, said, oh, that's pretty cool. Am I interested in that? And then, like, while I was trying to make up my mind, saw a copy of it in an auction and picked it up. I have a lot of XXs now that I'm falling behind on my list. But jumping back, yeah, these companies you buy your trains from. Now, the cost differential, the trains cost a certain amount, and only half of that goes into the company, and that's specified on there. This one allows you to run through a coal mining space, which don't count as normal spaces. 18 Virginia has something like this. I don't remember if it's the same mechanism. A lot of the mechanisms in this game are ones that are familiar, and the rules aren't complicated. It's just way off your expectations of what an 18XX plays like. For example, there's no starting cash for players, and it's printed on the board. Just to make that absolutely clear, because it doesn't actually say there's none in the rules, but yeah, that helped confirm to me. This one allows you to turn one of your trains into a plus train. And again, These are the car capabilities, the coal, that, and the RABA. And then finally the SZKEV, sort of a lump in extra things. You're allowed to place an extra yellow tile each turn as your second tile placement, but it costs you $10 to that company. And whenever you buy a miner's station, half the money goes into here. They're normally 40-80, 20-40 goes into here. So like the trains, the capital investment of the stuff that the trains normally invest in is halved, except for the terrain. What else do you have? Well, at the beginning of the game, instead of a private auction, instead of an auction of the privates, and sometimes there's other stuff thrown in there, I think 1835 has the miners in there. It also has some some certificates available that you can buy. Instead of having that private auction, Lonnie doesn't like privates. I'm calling him Lonnie Leonard, but I don't know him, and he feels more like Lonnie to me. He doesn't like auctions in his games, and has tried to avoid them. In this one, he has a particularly interesting set, which is you simply select, and there are, let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 companies. So there's 14 single shares, 2 from each company, in the initial packet, and 13 private miners. Okay, and following not a serpent, but a situation that doesn't advantage the first player selection process, you pick whichever one you want, and you go around until you've gotten your full portfolio, whatever that is for the number of players. This game also has a 2-player version. It's printed on the back. I haven't looked at how that works. And then it has a solo version where there's sort of a bot that you play the 2-player version against. To me, that's not all that exciting, but, you know, I don't know. I have at least one friend who he and I may end up playing the 2-player version just to see how it works, but I haven't tried it yet. So yeah, so what you have is your miners that are normal. You have your corporations up here that do have presidencies. As soon as you get 2 shares in your holding of one of those, as soon as somebody gets 2 shares, they exchange those 2 shares for the presidency. It works like it would normally work in an 18xx game. But there's kind of an interesting thing. These corporations are operable and running and able to provide dividends and change stock value. Sometimes up, sometimes not. They operate in ways that defy your expectations. Trust me on that. Before the presidency is sold, you don't have to sell a certain number of certificates or anything. They operate even if nobody has any of them, although probably doesn't make much difference in that case. You could probably just not put the cash in them because they spend it all on dividends. But once somebody has the presidency, that presidency is treated like a presidency in an 18xx game normally would be, which means there will always be somebody holding that presidency, one way or another. There's not really a rate factor to this game, although you might not want to be president of a company. There's no real big negative. You're not going to have to, you know, throw a lot of your cash in or whatever, but your money is tied up in those 2 shares, and that corporation might not be attractive to have anything in. It might be losing you money for a period of the game. So that's something to keep in mind about it. Everything on the board is pretty normal. Your terrain markings, these little water ones are a little hard. You just count the number of those, and that's the number of $10 expenses that you have to spend to go through that space. There is one special thing. Some of the miners have a little disk space on them. That's going to be one of these. That allows you to negate 1 hex's terrain penalty cost for the miner. The money still goes into the SIC over there. It just comes out of the bank. Well, if players aren't buying the presidency to float a corporation, how does, the initial par value get set? Well, that's done with this. This is a deck of cards with, I think, 2 of each of these values. It's more than you need. It's got to be more than 2. It's got to be like 3 because there's only 5 here. It's more than you need, and what I think you should do, just to make things perfectly fair, is randomize who you're drawing for their initial par values. Now, par values aren't of any importance, except that they set the initial stock value for a stock. That initial stock value could be part of how you make your determination on whether or not to select a share of that stock early in the game. Probably more importantly is what that corporation does. So, for example, the MAGAV is worthless at the beginning of the game. It is going to lose value. Now, on your second stock round? I don't know. I don't know if you're allowed to do it on the first stock round. I don't think so. I think you have to... Yeah. You have to play through one loss period. But the MAGAV, nobody's going to be buying any of the trains that the MAGAV has for sale in that first round. So that is immediately you don't want shares of this. But maybe you do if they're worth 80 and everybody else is clustered down towards the bottom. Maybe it's worth it because they'll only lose $5 of value. However, some of these others are going to make you some pretty decent money, even in that first operating round. Notably, the SIC is of interest. Others probably aren't going to make you a hell of a lot. This one is, because people want to lay 2 tracks right away. But everybody starts with a 2 train. They're not going to have the cash to run their train. All right, let me get more into the details. I'm not going to read through this the way that I do with most. I'm assuming some familiarity with 18XX, so you may have to skip along. I just don't think that anybody who's not into an XX, the XX series, is going to hunt this one down, although it is intriguing. And it's not that hard. It wouldn't make a bad starter, although it is long. At least it feels it to me. And yeah, and it has some complexities. Oh, here's another complexity. The tracks. There's a lot of tracks. There's a lot of fucking trains. They're unlimited. There's a lot of and there's no rusting. There's a lot of tracks, and they're double-sided. A lot of them have something different on the other side. So all the straight tracks have a wide curve on them, as an example. Duplicate, the reverse images. So the 23s are on the other side of the 24s. And that means you are limited on the track lays. So if a lot of people are doing that kind of movement, you get to choose which one you want. In a lot of games, the map seems to turn in one direction. So like a game that has like 3 23s and 3 24s, you may find that like one of the 24s is used and all of the 23s are used and somebody wants another one, you know? So especially since this has kind of the whirlpool of an important city in the middle with Budapest. Other thing that I didn't mention, these sticks. These are barriers that you can't cross. I think they're kind of a clever idea. These 3 are kind of normal. You normally have, you know, these kind of bars going back certainly to 1830. I don't know if any of the 29s had them. That just say you can't go from this space to another. And they indicate particularly difficult terrain, or maybe the edge of the world. You're outside of Hungary going through here, and they're just not letting you make that connection. This one's a little different. It's a big lake. This actually cuts a hex, and when you start playing on that hex, you can't cross from one side to the other ever, and that's going to be maintained on the hexes. You also have K's. You know, like sometimes cities have a special type. Well, we have a few special types here. We have B, which is Budapest, which has a progression. Doesn't start out yellow on the board. You got to build that. Right. And it ends up combining eventually. You have the K's, though, which are built to get you in these corner areas. They're actually more valuable than the normal cities, I believe. Yeah, a little bit. And they don't exist in the yellow track. There's no yellow K's. There's no marker to tell you what's a K and what's not, except on the board, but it's printed next to the space as well as in the space. That's helpful for identification, so you don't have to use extra counters to indicate the K cities. And then you have UUs, which work like UUs always do. You have some yellow ones which are only have one city on them. They don't give you any. The second city space is sort of not really on the board, but you have one that you can define and work out of in the yellow period of the train game. And then a whole bunch of greens, and then the browns end up combining the cities. The UUs are mainly along the river, and they have a kind of interesting facet, which is the first track that you build doesn't cost anything. There's no terrain marker on any of these UUs at the beginning of the game. But the next one has 2 terrain markers because somebody's crossing a river. It's a little weird to me because well, what it means is when you go to green, it's assumed that at least some of these are going to cross the river. And you might be in situations where that's not clearly the case, but that's okay. And then after that, these don't have the marker. So when you combine the city, the cost has already been paid for, even though there's no linkage between those 2 cities. Yeah, so let's get back to the order of the game. So at the beginning of the game, you randomize seating as normal. There's cards to do that. Player who gets the 1 position gets priority deal. Nobody gets any cash to begin with, and they get to select either a private or, let me put 2 of these in the treasury for each company to indicate that those are available for selection. I find that works just fine. I don't want to lay a lot of stuff out on the board because the track, you know, understanding the board is important to making your decisions. Okay, so you have a choice between a minor or a share of stock. You just take it. It's all equally valued, even though these are different values. And then the second player goes, and you go all the way around. Priority then pushes to the second player, and they get first choice on the next one. What that means is that the second player has a really good selection, right? They get the second choice overall, and then, well, the n+1th choice, which is definitely better than what anybody else faces. The first player gets the first choice, and then they're falling pretty late in the picks. Where this is most important is with the minors. Getting 1 share of a major corporation, that could mean some extra cash that you have in your pocket. And that could be important because remember, cash snowballs in 18xx games, but less in this one than in most. And you'll see why when we see how these guys operate. But yeah, so getting the second and n+1th choice overall allows you to probably get a good synergy between your 2 railroads. You get a decent first choice of railroad, and you can probably get something near it that's pretty good too. Some of the other players may end up with some really bad choices. Now I'm going to be playing in 6 players, and what that means is that all but one of these gets dealt out. All these corporations are in play no matter what. There's no way to get rid of them. Anyway, you continue that through until everybody's got however many they're supposed to get. And that is dependent on the number of players. So I'm going to be playing 6 players. That means you're allowed to pick 2 miners and 2 from Group B, which is the share selections. And that's a total of 4. You're always limited to a specific number of miners and a specific number of shares. There is no reason you would take shares over a miner. A miner is going to make you a lot more money over the course of the game. The share, well, you could buy a share in your next stock round for the cost. You know, they don't mean anything. It's not like a presidency. So like the Bear and the Sash in 1835, you get those as initial picks, and they give you a certain kind of power over the game. There's nothing like that kind of power here. There is something interesting, though. I haven't mentioned these guys. These are blocking tokens that the corporations have. The players have tokens, the miners have tokens too. But they also improve the value of the city that they're in. And this is something, I can't remember which one. I think 21 Mars used, and maybe the 18 SVEA, where there are the tokens increase the value of the locations. Well, here, the only tokens that do is these guys, but they also do block the city out partially, which is an intriguing option. And they cost the same amounts, the 40, 80, that the ones from your miners do. That money does not go into we'll call it the SESCIV. Okay. So that's how you select things at the beginning. If you end up taking 2 shares of the same corporation, you get the presidency of that corporation. There's 2 advantages to the presidency of the corporation. You control the corporation's capabilities for 2 functions. One is buying these, and the other is how much to distribute in terms of revenue at the end of the operating round. The other advantage, other than controlling these 2 kind of small choices, although being able to put blocking or bonus tokens can be pretty big for your miners. These two choices also, the second advantage beyond those 2 choices is that there's a certificate limit like there is in most XX games, and in 6 that's going to be 9 certificates, which is not a lot total. So a presidency allows you to be holding 2 shares for 1 certificate. These do not count against your certificate limit. That's kind of cool. Okay. In the operating rounds, all right, I'm going to take a urination break. I think I had something else to say, but I've lost it. So let's go back to where we were. In the operating rounds, the miners run first, as they often do, and they run in numerical order, as they do in general. They have no stock value to deal with. And that has an important consequence, especially right at the beginning of the game. Right, it also means you can't jiggle that order, but no stock manipulation to do anything of any importance, really. There's almost no importance to the order those guys go in. There might be in some cases. Probably not right at the beginning of the game, so that randomization isn't that big a deal. That's not in here, but the first company to build track doesn't have a lot they can build. So let's take a look at the 1. They could build here and here, and that's about it. Basically, they're going to be running, or they could build here and here, but basically they're going to be running at most a 2 train between these 2 spaces. And that's got a pretty fixed value to it. It looks like it's going to be important late in the game because you have the pass through what appears to be that most important central city that's got the highest value. But it's not as important as you might initially think. And I let a lot of my thinking go around, hey, how do I get access to Buddha? Well, Buddha is worth, Budapest, when it's there, is worth 80. There's nothing that size, but there is a 70, and there's a 70 over here. So yeah, there are other important places on the board. You don't have to worry if you get cut off from that. Also, the track is going to be a tangled mess that most people can hit that, whether, you know, if they want to. They may not be able to hit it efficiently, but we'll see. Okay. And each of the miners does, first it can build track. It's allowed to do the normal one track build, either lay a yellow track on a green space or upgrade by one color level, maintaining all connections, etc. And dots and anything. And then they can pay $10 to this guy in order to lay a second yellow track. And it's got to be in that order, I believe. It's not clear. Yeah, it says order stated. So that's kind of important, because what you can't do is this is kind of hard to explain, but you can't build track that reaches to some place you want to break into and break into it. You have to be able to reach where you're breaking into before, if you're going to do that. And that allows some blockage that wouldn't otherwise be possible. Then you're allowed to buy and place station markers. I think you might be able to buy more than one at once. No, just one. Okay. And the cost for those, you get your first one for free. And then they're 40 and 80 bucks each. And again, this is optional. Scrap trains. So this is something new. Normally you can't discard trains. In this game, you have to be able to discard trains. You just put it back in the pile. Remember, those piles are infinite that it's been taken from. I haven't explained what these things are. These are markers that change the phase as new trains come out, because the order of the trains is not fixed. It's... I mean, you're not going to jump from the 2 to the 6. But in the game that I played... Oh, that's what I wanted to say. So I played this once all the way through, except for the last operating round. And then I was like, well, I either play that last operating round, and they're getting pretty hairy by that point, or I do the intro. And I decided I wanted to get the intro started and maybe even play a little bit, because the early rounds are much easier. So I know enough. I just don't know who won, but I'm fine with that. I have a pretty good clue. Okay, so after you choose to scrap any trains you want, and you probably only want to scrap one, each of these miners can only hold 2 trains on it at any one time. And you start with one for free. Then you run your trains, and you must do this, and if anybody points out a higher revenue run, you have to take it. I can't imagine why anybody would care. There is absolutely no reason to be looking out to make sure other people can get better runs. But you can't try to hurt yourself. And hurting yourself doesn't do any good for you. There's no bankruptcy in this game, nothing like that. Revenue is run largely as normal. Let's take a look. So one of the specifics is if there's 2 cities in a map, in a particular location, you can hit them both with the same train. Some games don't allow that. Normal stuff, you can't run over the same track twice with multiple trains. So special cases for the revenue. You travel through these, they don't count as a stop. However, if you pay, and you can only do this for one train for one of these coal mines on the board per turn, if you pay the cost for cars, which is listed here. So what this says is, in the yellow phase, it costs 10 for the first one, 20 more for the second, 30 more for the third. And then once you get to the brown phase and beyond, the prices go up a little bit. If you pay that cost for one of your trains, it's allowed to run through one of these. You're allowed to run through it anyway, but when it runs through one of these, it's allowed to collect the value of it without counting against its run number, right? So the trains have a run number on them. A 2 can only hit 2 locations. Well, you can get a bonus location. That makes being near these coal mines exceedingly valuable early in the game. Give you a big jump in revenue. Better perhaps than just a higher valued location city would initially. Other ones, same thing. You pay a car value for the blue one. And what you're allowed to do is your train converts to an X plus X train. So if you have a 2 train, it's a 2 plus 2. If you have a 4, it's a 4 plus 4. And plus trains in 18XX, the way they work, because they're not in many of the games, the way they work is that you can go through that many doinkers, these things, without having to, they count as the plus part. So if you have a 2 plus 2, you can go to 2 major cities and 2 doinkers. And you get to add the revenue of all of that. You could also go to 1 major city and 3 doinkers, counting a doinker as a major under those conditions. But you basically get a couple of doinkers for free. And, you know, once you get to the 6 train, that's a 6 plus 6. That's going to be able to hit most of the doinkers that you could possibly hook up. So that's an interesting concept to keep in mind. But again, only 1 train can have that capability each turn. And you have to pay each turn that you want it. And that means you have to have the cash in your miner to do so, which can get you in some trouble if you build a route, use up all your money to buy a bigger train, and now your route's not what it used to be for that turn, because you're going to get half your money in there. And then you keep half the income in the miner, just gets put in there, and the other half goes in your pocket. And then you're allowed to buy trains. You're only allowed to buy trains if you have space for them. You're always allowed to buy from other miners, if they're willing to sell, for any amount at least equal to $1 florin or whatever that they're using here. And then you're done with your run, and the next number goes. So after the 1, the 2 goes, etc. We got all the you know, details on what you can play, where, establishing stations, pretty standard rules for all of this. Scrapping trains, the only way trains get scrapped is that you dump them back into the corporation that produces those trains. When you buy the train, like I said, you pay the full value, half of it goes into the corporation. Operating trains, standard rules, calculating income, standard rules, all on that. Purchase of trains, I've already explained that. How do the phase changes work? Okay, the way phase changes work is you, when you buy a new train of a new type, the first time you do it, the greens come in play, and whatever the current operating round was, you're now on this one before the stock round. When you buy the second new type of train, doesn't matter what it is, one of these comes off, and now, once again, you're there. So you could have gone from being in the midst of this operating round to now being one before the stock round, which can shake, rattle, and roll things. The final one, and I've got it over on the 6, but no guarantee it happens with the 6, is this. And once again, you automatically get placed one before the stock round. This will be the last stock round, then there'll be 3 remaining operating rounds. The color that comes out, green, brown, or gray, is an indication of the phase change. You can't lay green tiles until the first new train comes out and greens become available. This also affects the values here as normal. Likewise with browns and grays. These are not gray. Very limited selection of gray tiles, all city or junction based. Okay. All right, paying out income. Nope, I lied. Okay. The next part of the operating round goes to the major corporations. This is pretty normal, and I am having to swap batteries, I think. Normal in terms of the ordering that you do in most games. Privates pay out their money, miners, then you go to the major corporations. Here you've got rid of the privates, so all the miners run in numerical order, then you go and run the major corporations. And they also run, as usual, in stock value order, and all the manipulations on there are exactly as you'd expect for an 18XX with a straight track in terms of you take the highest valued company who got into that space first as the first company, and then you work your way down from there. Okay. For a major corporation, first thing they have to do is choose whether or not they're going to buy and place a station marker. They're only allowed one per round, and that costs 40 or 80 bucks, and you can put it anywhere on the fucking board. Since all the miners start with their dots at the beginning of the game, you're free to put it in any space you want. What that will do is that will increase the revenue, well, in any city space you want. That'll increase the revenue of that city by 10 bucks, which is pretty fucking awesome. But it also is treated as a block, just like a station token from a normal corporation would be in any other XX. Well, the miners. Okay. Then you're allowed to choose how much you want to pay out. And that works here. If you got no money, you got no choice. You slip back a space, and that's life. If you got money, you can choose any amount of money to pay out as dividends, and that total amount is divided by 10, and people with shares in it get their share of it. And that determines how far you move forward. It has nothing to do with your current value, but you're able to push out a lot of money and move several spaces in advance. Therefore, between that combination of things, the most valuable of these corporations are the ones that are going to generate the most use. You know, if it's the car companies, you know, that's kind of hard to tell, right? Late in the game, this one becomes pretty heavily used, but earlier in the game, these two are probably more valuable. Early in the game, these two are very valuable, but they hit their peaks at other times in the game as well. And the rail company, the train companies, they're almost like a huge windfall profit when certain trains become desirable, affordable, and then go through these long desert periods. So managing them might mean keeping money in your corporation treasury so that you can avoid going backwards and maybe go forward quite a bit. Because your stock value is important, as in any XX game. Okay. And this thing, because the 6th train probably is going to trigger the grays, and a lot of people are going to want them at the end of the game, generates boatloads of money at the end of the game, probably more than it can go forward. Whereas some of the others might be almost unappealing, like they might produce almost nothing at the end of the game and have a hard time keeping their stock value forward. This one, you know, was sitting with like $1,000 on it in the game that I played on that second to last operating round, and was doling out, you know, $210 to move forward for each time over several turns, because it was in the middle of a desert. But that doesn't matter if you hold the money. If no one holds the presidency of the corporation, It will not buy a token. Makes sense. Who would choose? And it doles out all of its money as dividends, which might send its value up high. You know. Share dealing. You have to sell all shares first in each stock turn, and then you're allowed to buy one certificate, one share. And that might get you the directorship if now you have 20% and nobody else does at that company, or if you've exceeded someone and all that, just as normal. Turn order in the share round is dealt with by priority deal. The only thing you're going to be dealing with in the share round is the corporations. Nothing allows you to play around with the miners in there. You have a certificate limit as in most games. Once you sell a share, you can't buy it back in that same stock round. And the share just goes back in here. And quite often, price goes back, goes to the left one for every time that you sell shares of that corporation. You probably want to sell them all together so you get maximum price. But you're not going to be smashing the price by selling, 4 of them at once or something. You have a limit. You're only allowed to hold 60% of any corporation. At the end of a stock round, the price goes up by 1 for any corporation that's fully sold out. The game ends after the gray tile comes out, and you do 1 remaining stock round, 3 remaining operating rounds, and then you count the tally. Nothing too exciting there. Like I said, there's a back-printed version of the map that's different. This is just to keep track of the money that the miners make. It's less important here than in most games. So nobody's investing in the miners, right? So it's really not that necessary to look and be able to tell how much anybody's miner is making. So all it's serving is as a mnemonic device to tell you, hey, I made this much last time. How come I'm making less this time? What changed? That kind of thinking. 2-player, let's see. Use the back of the board, smaller board, I think. Only a smaller selection of miner companies. In the 6-player game, 1 miner is not going to be in the game. And I think that has the most of them. Use only 4 of the major companies. Let's see, the LT, STEG, the SIC, the SCEV, and the RABA. I didn't explain how the RABA generates income. So I've explained how these 2 generate income. For the RABA, if you pay your car cost, it will generate 20 extra bucks for 1 red offboard location for 1 of your trains. And once you hit the brown or later, it generates 30 extra bucks. And remember, these cost more. Now, what's interesting, though, you're splitting the revenue, right? Late in the game, assuming you got your trains set, your miners are just going to be collecting revenue in here that they don't really need. So spending that revenue to hit all the goodies, it doesn't really hurt you, and it produces more income, which you get half of. So normally, though, there's this balance where, I'm spending money out of here. So like if I'm spending 10 bucks out of here to hit a doinker, right? Just 1 without counting it. Maybe I'm only getting 5 bucks in my treasury and 5 bucks in here. So I'm losing 5 bucks from my treasury to get 5 bucks in here, or stuff like that. So there are times when you don't want to play these, even at the lowest levels. And at the higher level, remember, they start getting expensive. If you buy all 3 of these for one miner, you're paying 60 bucks at the beginning of the game and 90 at the later stage. You got to make up that money somehow, right? Let's see. Eliminate all 6 trains, put the 2, 3, and 4s into the orange. I think it flips over and has a different charter on the back. I'm not sure. Oh no, it's on the board instead. Yeah, because the board's been made smaller, so there's room for all of this. The bonus for the red, the Raba over there, is either an off-board location or turning a train into a plus train. There are no mines in this one. And then you have your cost, and you can only use it once. Share price cost is printed on the board. Highest value is 300. The highest here is 400. It doesn't do anything special, except makes you say, wow, I'm not going to gain any more share value from this corporation. I don't know if you can reach it. One thing I can tell you is jumping out ahead early on share value with one of the ones that's good at doing that. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to stay ahead. You reach a period where you're struggling to stay even with some of these companies that are able to pay out a lot early. And because they're paying out a lot early, because it's early in the game when they're paying out their big money, you might want to pay out not just to get share value, but to get capital in your hands that you can, invest in other shares or whatever. But then later, you want to maximize your overall profit from it because you're no longer limited by cash. There's a lot of money ends up in players' hands in this game. A lot of money. I may have to pull, like when I was playing, I wasn't through the blacks, my 500s. I used 1s, 5s, 25, 100, 500, just because that works really well for most games. But like an 18-0E, I was probably going to have to break into another bank, but not for 500s, but because there's all these miners and all these things that are paying out like $3 a share and shit like that late in the game when nothing pays out those kind of stupid amounts. I was finding that I was running out of everything except the 500s. Well, I had 100s left, but basically there were a lot of companies, first the 25s go, and then I have to throw a lot of reds in to make 25s, and eventually I was down to the 1s, and I was really worried I was going to hit my bank too hard. Maybe there's a different proportion of money that I could use with this set, but I do have another box if I need to. I just haven't opened anything in it. The 500s were already open when I got it. Share price movement is the same. Wait, no, it's got a different valuation on it. There are no gray track tiles, no gray phase, special round. Yeah, it's basically the same game, just on a smaller board. And then there's a solo variant where there's actually a randomized deck of cards here, and a special sheet and whatnot that allow you to run the bot, which is kind of a cute idea for people who, want to play a true solo version, this Istvan. They allow you to play a true solo version of an XX game. I don't know another one that does that, which is interesting enough. Materials are good. I'll talk about them later during review time. But yeah, you got your map on the back, which is always helpful. You got the track upgrades in the rule book. There was also a sheet that came with the game, a heavier stock sheet that reproduces all that information. And then whoever had it before me photocopied that in nice color photocopy. So there's like, I don't know how many different sets of that, but yeah, that is very helpful. Anything that I didn't go over that's sitting on here that I have to talk about? I don't think so. I think that's the rules. I am going to actually probably start tonight. My sleep schedule's fucked up, so and I'll send this up.